All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. And my name is Nick Lahiri, and I'm from Essel Environmental. And for those of you that have joined, so thank you for joining us on this webinar today. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about basically how to bridge the workforce gap in the construction industry specifically. And some of the things that we're going to cover are some of the based on our experiences that we've seen in the overall workforce sector of our business, and some of the clients that we work with, and some of the challenges that we're seeing in the overall marketplace. Right, a lot of people have heard about the construction workforce challenges and different hiring. We have a different perspective on it based on working within the construction industry, working on behalf of companies to help them build the project teams. Looks like a few more people are kind of joining in, so I'll give it a couple more minutes and we'll get started in about 2 to 3 minutes, right around 11:05 for those of you on the West Coast. So give me 1 second. I'm just going to grab a quick glass of water and maybe be right back. All right. One more minute, and what I'll do is I will minimize my face, and you're welcome in advance. Just make sure the settings are right here. This is actually our first time doing a live stream, and using Restream. So for all my 110, 15 fans, thank you for telling me about Restream. Really excited about this platform. Seems to make everything a lot easier. So, all right, it's 11:05, magic time. So let's get this show on the road. I know everyone's got a lot of stuff to do today. Anybody in sales out there, hopefully you're selling some stuff. But yeah, like I was mentioning, very excited to cover this topic. One of the unique journeys we've had is to be able to help environmental as well as general contractors work with filling some of their project-based needs on skilled trades and hiring, and also work with companies to create a hiring process so that they can internally become better at organizing themselves, as well as looking at this in a new department, in terms of being able to compete in this economy and sector that we have. So the goal for today is to kind of give you a high-level overview on the state of the construction industry, state of the workforce industry, on how they're sort of inversely related, right? And one of the things that we're going to be talking about is a shift going from a recruiting mindset to a talent acquisition mindset, and how they can benefit your organization. And similarly, some of the things that we'll be kind of covering is also what are some options available to you for somebody that's in the construction industry to be able to manage and have some help with your overall workforce planning, as well as getting the personnel that you need to move your projects forward. So high level, one of the things a lot of people have heard is the fact that the construction industry, like similar industries like the AEC industry, has had a significant number of job openings increasing since 2020. And it's likely been happening since 2019, but we've seen a steady increase in the job openings, and that has only been exacerbated by federal funding for the infrastructure projects, and has created a lot of pressure in terms of projects that need personnel, yet there's not enough applicants and or employees to go around, right? So you can see some of the statistics here from 2020 to where this survey was done by Fixer in middle of 2022. In the middle of 2022, we were right around 405,000 open positions, job openings that have been happening. Not double, but pretty close from compared to where we were in 2020, right? And as a result, one of the things that kind of has contributing to the big gap is the fact that already going into the pandemic, the percentage of the construction population or the construction workforce decreased by a pretty significant amount, by almost 8 to 10%, whereas the job openings and the infrastructure spending increased starting in 2020, right? So that inverse relationship already created a pretty significant difference in terms of already starting from a deficit. Now, as we came out of the short-term recession we faced in 2020, didn't really alleviate a lot of the challenges that we were having. And continually with the pace of the economy, infrastructure spending, commercial construction spending, and residential construction, that gap was never made up. And as a result, we see that there's a lot of different challenges facing the construction industry. So first and foremost, you've got competition from other industries. Employees or prospective employees take a look at what they would be doing in construction, and could they make a similar wage doing something else that's less laborious, less elements, whatever it might be. And as a result, sometimes they are losing to other industries. Number two is you have the traditional challenge of people choosing different careers entirely, not getting trained in the trades. They're going for maybe college education, college degrees versus trade schools, or just starting in the workforce in more white collar positions across the board, right? So those are the kind of scenarios that we're seeing that is contributing to the continual deficit. And as a result, retaining the workforce is also a problem based on the lack of a work-life balance in a lot of scenarios. The ABC sort of created a similar type of survey in terms of the projections of how this industry is going to continue to grow, as well as what that deficit is going to be created, right? So one of the things that I find very interesting about this graph is the fact that, number one, they're projecting a significant amount of growth in the next coming years within the construction industry based on the funding and everything else that's happening. And within that, obviously the labor portion is not catching up to it or even coming even close. And as the funding continues, there's obviously not going to be a decrease in terms of funding, in terms of allotment of allocations and things like that. And you're absolutely right, Douglas. The pay scale also is very important, and that's one of the things that we're kind of looking at as a next step is getting companies to update their hiring processes, as well as sort of getting away from and being aware of what that market looks like to make sure that they're paying an adequate wage for the project, right? And one of the biggest things right now is organizations still continue to think that just by putting up a help wanted sign, which in this day and age is a job ad on Indeed, is basically become something where people are just going to apply, right? And that's one of the biggest misnomers that those that are on the forefront of talent acquisition and recruiting, they're finding out that, it's not that simple anymore. And one of the things that we're always talking about is making sure that, whenever you're having an industry-wide shortage, it's always there's certain companies that are doing it right or figuring it out, and other ones that are still kind of stuck to their old ways and saying, it's very hard to find good people, but there's always a direct correlation. So whenever we kind of think about where to find the personnel, the fact that trade schools aren't going to necessarily catch up in time, one of the first things is the company has an option to do is to hire internally, right? So for example, they create an internal program, internal department that is basically focused on 100% in hiring their personnel and going out there and recruiting talent. Within that, they're creating referral programs for for various types of existing employees. They're doing job fairs and things like that. The second option is to hire an outside vendor, whether it be a subcontractor that have extra employees, which is hardly the case. There are staffing agencies and ones that provide construction level help in those types of scenarios, as well as other types of organizations that are trying to form labor pools and things of that sort to be able to continue forward and getting creative about those types of pooling workers together or co-employing. Those types of creative solutions. The challenge is that it doesn't necessarily alleviate the immediate need for projects, the immediate need for talent, the immediate need for skilled trades to help on projects, right? So one of the things is you have to know is what is the market really conveying, and what are the industry leaders in the market doing in terms of attracting talent. You'll find a lot of organizations are going out of their way to invest in education, investing additional training, technology, et cetera, et cetera. And so understanding where your company really falls within that is a big place to understand and make sure that whatever you're offering as a benefits package or a compensation package, whatever it might be, falls in line with everything else that the industry is now doing, right? Other companies are doing, so that your organization isn't looked upon as a lesser alternative, right? And then obviously the higher pay, being aware of what the wage scales really are in a market, and ensuring that there is a upward mobility for personnel, so that they don't see themselves as doing the same thing every single time. And this kind of goes into this wage scale here is more of a federal statistic. This graph where it talks about skilled trades and everything being in a various, wide range of a wage scale. Now, what we've noticed is, based on some of the research we've done, which we'll cover in the next slide, these wages are basically in a place like the Bay Area or in a gateway market, typically are 25 to 50% higher than a traditional, just a federal statistic, right? And so this gives you an idea of the different and various ways that you can generate and what the wage scales are. This is an example of a carpenter job position within this source for this is Indeed. And they talk about what a typical average salary is per hour. And it shows that this is 71% above the national average. Now, this candidate or this profile is a carpenter job within, let's say, 25 miles in Oakland, California. And it shows, just some of the statistics that a platform like Indeed sees in their data is the fact that, 62% of our, in any type of positions, come from mobile devices. 36.82 average is per hour in terms of the wage. And you'll notice here the minimum and the maximum. There's some wage scales that are very, reaching upwards of $55 an hour. And the unemployment percentage is relatively low, as expected, right? Similarly, if you look at another type of position profile like a finished carpenter, you'll see that the average salary is $30.91, which is, again, this one is at about 36% above the national average. There's high competition in this type of job and wage scale. And so if you're an organization and you're looking at some of these statistics related to what you're paying or what the industry is paying in terms of this, available research from Indeed and these platforms, you want to make sure that if you're posting an ad already that is below the average or significantly below in terms of benefits and things like that, that you're going to have a harder time in recruiting for these types of talent. This helps not only the estimating teams in an organization, but also the product development teams, project management teams, superintendent teams, to make sure that the talent acquisition side is dialed in, right? So all these pieces of information, we suggest obviously your recruiting department or your talent acquisition department should take that on and make sure that they're incorporating and doing an analysis and making sure that the jobs that people are applying for truly are providing the benefit that they need, right? And so one of the things that we also notice in the construction industry is that there is no real one size fits all approach, right? Because at the end of the day, based on some of the immediate needs on projects to keep them on budget and on time, that's a separate skill set or a separate need than companies and projects that are focused on their longer term hiring. So corporate positions. So let's say project executives, business development, things of that sort. And so what we always recommend in terms of looking to how to solve your hiring the workforce gap for your organization or for the industry is to be able to have a plan in place for both, right? Because what might help you in one aspect, which is the workforce for the project-based positions, may not be the same exact strategy that's going to help you in the other in the corporate positions. And so one of the things that we're getting is, in terms of the setting up the organization, is to be able to setting up the attraction of the program to attract, manage, and retain talent. And Doug, your stats in terms of the $30+ an hour, those are from Indeed.com. I can send you, if you shoot me your email, I can send you a couple of those reports. I think we have those reports as an employer because we post ads on Indeed and things like that. But they are able to aggregate a lot of that data to be able to make that easier across the board. So that is from Indeed.com, and they're what they call hiring insights as a part of their overall research program. So great question. And so essentially, as a construction company, one of the things that we're seeing is moving on from relying on your HR team to do everything to moving into a talent acquisition mindset, right? And that means that being able to create a strategy that's unique to both the corporate positions as well as your project-based positions, and making sure that there's someone responsible for ensuring the metrics of bringing those people in, right? And as a result, that's one of the big things in terms of understanding how people apply and how people go from, needing a job to coming in. They'll be able to make that happen, right? And as a result, on the recruiting process, the awareness from all the way down to, submitting to a job and getting hired across the board, it will become, first job is to make sure that you have a department that's responsible and able to make people aware of the various types of positions that are available, a little bit about your company, generating the consideration, the interest, and then getting to the application phase, right? So right now, but organizations that rely on the HR team to be able to make that happen is challenging, just because of the fact that HR is already inundated with HR related tasks, and it's not very conducive to talent acquisition, right? And so they'll have no other choice than to leave the recruiting to when they have time, aside from the human resources tasks. And so moving that on from having someone dedicated to move someone down this funnel is one of the key areas and shifts that an organization can really make to make sure that they're coming in across the board, right? So that's more of an internal focus. Now, the other focus the other option that you have is obviously looking at different options pertaining to staffing agencies versus staffing partners, but essentially third-party vendors that can really assign you and provide you with some insight pertaining to your organization, right? So again, this is probably more appropriate when you have project-based needs as opposed to corporate type of recruiting, although there are companies that specialize in corporate positions. A lot of times the traditional way that it's been done has been, talking about staffing agencies that just kind of send you personnel or send you the immediate, bodies you might need. And so some of the things you might, know, or if you haven't used a staffing company before, typically you make a call, depending on if whatever they specialize in, and they'll send you someone to the job site, right? In this type of scenario, where we find a high level of clients looking for staffing agencies is pertaining to just kind of needing bodies for cleaning or labor or repetitive tasks. Now, the challenge with that is that the entire management, onboarding, everything is left up to you, meaning your superintendent, right? And so as long as they're prepared to do that, then overall that's perfectly fine, right? But then the challenge becomes is when companies expect the staffing agencies to send over a skilled tradesperson. A lot of times, again, that management and then onboarding isn't really there. And that's kind of where we are as an organization have seen an opportunity, and where our construction partnerships have really taken off, is to be able to work with the superintendents, to work with the project teams, to help those skilled trades types of personnel that can really help with the production of the project, right? And that's something that we haven't seen a lot of different agencies be able to do across the board, which is kind of where we saw the opportunity. But fundamentally, you can there are these options available depending on the types of tasks that you need to have done. Third-party contractors, third-party agencies that will be able to help. Now, obviously, the pros and cons of having a third-party contractor or a third-party staffing agency is, number one, they can give you the bodies when you need it, right? You can make a call. You don't have to carry them on your payroll after the project is done. So as long as the project is going live, you can make sure that you have someone that's billable, being billed to the project. And again, generally, we see this more commonly with general labor and general task-based personnel as opposed to skilled trades. And when it works well, right? There's a lot of times where people will come in and make a difference on a job site. What a lot of clients tell us is that, they look at a traditional staffing agency, not necessarily a long-term solution, just because they're providing initial assistance on the first part and getting up and running. But there is a high level of dissatisfaction within organizations that use staffing agencies. And one of the things we're going to cover today is to give you some tips on how you can kind of vet some of the staffing agencies you might be coming across in terms of assisting with that. 7 out of 10 companies report having a negative experience with the staffing agency. And so those are the kind of things that create more headaches for superintendents. They feel like they have to babysit some of these people coming from agencies because they're not fully ready to just hit the ground running, if you will. And that's kind of the expectations that a lot of people have, right? And for skilled trades, there's a high level of just missing the mark on staffing agencies. So in this example, being able to put together a team that is 100% ready to provide assistance and increase production on a job site, there's a lot of areas where they just miss the mark. So one of the first things we always kind of talk about with construction companies in being able to take a look at and how they can work better with staffing agencies per se is to really build a relationship or shortlist 2 or 3 companies that can help, not just with their short-term needs in terms of laborers and cleaners, but also higher level needs like skilled trades. And being able to vet them a little bit is an important part to say, where you can really use them. So in this example, the type of the skill sets that understanding the type of the skill sets that they specialize in, a lot of times we recommend our clients ask the different companies they're speaking with examples of different positions or examples of different placements they've had where they've had success. If a company says they do everything across the sun, they can do any type of position, generally that's a red flag, just because it's obviously very challenging to have a team of carpenters, electricians, plumbers, concrete laborers all under one roof and do it all really well. And generally that's just not the way it works, right? So understanding their type of skill set is great. If they're able to answer that question, that's obviously a good sign. If they're able to say, if they're very general, that's more than likely not a good sign. The next thing is really understanding how they vet the people that they're sending out, right? And one of the biggest complaints that we get from companies that have used a traditional staffing agency is to really, they're just sending out a body. They say they're a carpenter, but they've never been vetted. They show up to the job site. It's up to the superintendent to really see whether or not they really know what they're doing. And by that time, based on the list of things that the superintendent already has to do, it creates a very unfortunate situation because now the superintendent almost becomes like a babysitter and has to oversee this person because obviously they can be a big liability on a job site, especially if they have power tools and things like that. And so that creates such a negative experience that the superintendent is then kind of says, you know what, next time I'll just deal with it myself. I'll deal with the shortage. I'll have people work extra hours. I'll work extra hours. And instead of dealing with and just wasting my time. So a lot of times, number one is what you want to look for when you're vetting someone and asking about their process is to make sure that, do they have a different vetting process or, program, if you will, for what we call the 3 different areas that make a great employee relationship. Number one is the behavioral, then skill set, and the intangibles. A lot of times on the behavioral side, you want to make sure that they really understand and get an understanding of what it's like to work in a job site, what it's like to work in an environment where you have 20, 30, 50 people working from all walks of life, different personalities, and do they have the ability to get along with everyone? Are they able to be reliable? Sometimes it's things that a lot of people consider to be just straightforward things, like showing up to work on time and taking your breaks, not leaving early, things like that, right? So making sure that the organization that you're going with or you're looking at has a program in place or a process in place to kind of vet this of these candidates. Number two is skill set. How are they assessing the skill set that someone says they have? Someone, we run across this all the time when we're having, and our recruiters are vetting out a carpenter that comes in and says, yeah, I've been doing carpentry for a long time, almost 5-10 years. And then we have certain skill-based questions that we ask them, and they're not able to answer the questions, right? And then the recruiter kind of dives in a little bit, and certain times you find out that someone that has been working maybe with a friend or with the parent, or worked with my dad for 20 years, they consider that to be experience. But the problem is, in a traditional situation, if that type of example is not vetted out a little bit further, then they'll run into a situation where they call themselves a carpenter. They show up to a rough framing project where the client needs them to be in a very strict production mentality right out of the gate, and they're kind of first couple days they're kind of getting the cobwebs out and things like that, which then creates a situation of sort of negative production, if you will, on behalf of the project, right? So these are the kind of things that create an adverse situation where a mismatch between what someone says they can do without really vetting. They're being sent out as a carpenter or electrician or a rough and plumber, whatever it might be, and it creates a big hassle or a headache for everyone across the board, right? So then that's the skill set side. So there should definitely have a program in place to be able to vet out some of the different areas that they're saying they're experts in. One of the most common areas we run into this is finished carpentry, punch list teams, et cetera, and making sure that they have a way to do that. Number three is really looking for the intangibles. A lot of times we've all met different personnel on job sites where they've come in as a laborer, or they've come in as a assistant superintendent, and they just have something about them where they can command a job site, they can command respect, they can be a leader. And as a result, they might not be the most skilled trades person right out of the gate, but their ability to understand high level, like what needs to be done on a job site, carry those tasks out and things like that, end up creating a pretty compelling scenario where these intangibles help them advance into the workplace and into the workforce across the board, right? And that's a pretty significant area. And not that you can really vet for that, not that you can really test for that, but understanding that if you have a candidate that has maybe has served in the military, armed forces, and has leadership positions within those types of scenarios, that they're used to being in an environment with high, different personalities. If they have management positions, or if they're leaders in those positions, if they're ranked in certain ways, that they have the ability to exceed or excel in those types of situations, right? Similarly, if you have people that have worked in law enforcement or played sports and things like that, those are the kind of intangibles that help contribute to knowing that there's definitely an upside in some of the employees and personnel that you're bringing on, to where they're able to kind of provide a much higher probability of success than someone that really doesn't. So, when we work with a client or a company, we're always trying to understand and rate our personnel so that we understand that, hey, this is how they fit into this puzzle, right? And so if a client is telling us that, hey, we're on the lookout for a foreman, they don't have to be, an expert 10-year carpenter, but we really need them to make sure they can command a job site, or they have a presence about them that can really, has a leadership potential or leadership capabilities. Then we know that when we have vetted someone and they have some of the intangibles that aren't typically showing up 100% on a resume, we know that we can push those candidates to the top and really have a conversation about them and create that connection, as opposed to just treating everyone as the same that's coming in across the board, right? So those are the kind of things that I think that create a much better experience on behalf of the client, which then equate to a better experience across the board on the project itself. And so the most important question upon that is, if you do actually need help with the skill trades, which a lot of companies do, how do they go into that scenario of skilled trades and really vet, number one, the skilled trades personnel, but number two, their experience in helping with the production. I mean, let's face it, when you're looking for help on a construction project, generally that help is related to keeping the project on time and on budget, and that can be equated to how to basically increase the production. Most commonly, clients will ask us, we have to be done here within 90 days, or it's going to cost us $10,000 a day, or whatever it might be. And so every person coming out helps make sure that they've done that work before, right? And so, and you know, basically we have across the board being able to come in and help them with that. So one of the things is to be able to increase that across the board and vet that and be able to identify what exactly do you need to be able to create success. One of the most common things that we have clients asking us when they ask for the punch list teams, for example, is our teams really ask about how can we create success? How can we create a scenario where, in terms of what do you consider success as superintendent? And a lot of times they'll break it down and say, anybody that's coming in should be able to clear 4 units a day, 10 units a day. And when they say clear, we mean trims are done, cleaning's done, et cetera, et cetera. And so then we make sure that whenever the team members are being put out to a project, that they are being held to the same standard. So when they're showing up, they're already starting with the mindset of, all right, 8 units a day. That's what I got to hit to meet the minimum bar. And then we're able to communicate and make sure that that's conveyed to them across the board, right? So looking at it, instead of just sending a body out that can just get something done, being able to look at something and say, what is your success, and ensuring that any agency or any vendor that you're talking to can align with that can be a very critical part of it. And similarly, it's kind of like the results-based staffing, as I was just talking about. One of the most common areas that the level that we like to talk in terms of really understanding what's success, whether it's rough framing, whether it's punch lists, et cetera, really getting down to the details of what is considered success helps make sure that we put together a team that genuinely provides value across the board and create success on a job site versus just sending someone and letting them figure it out. Right. So in conclusion, kind of those are the kind of areas that we see the opportunities. Number one is doing it yourself as an in-house basis, starting with the awareness side, and kind of I'll just go back to this original slide. Working internally to be able to create a process where people are starting at the top and they're working through each stage. And then from there, they fall at the bottom with the hire, right? So that takes time, that takes resources. So obviously recruiting and making sure that you have buy-in from your organization to help do that is a critical part. And once that's going to be something that's going to be done overnight. So it's critical to, looking at it, being able to do internally, which is the best option long-term, has to start with the process of going from a recruiting mindset to a sort of like a talent acquisition mindset that kind of has a separate focus for both project-based approaches as well as corporate approaches, right? And similarly, for evaluation and sort of getting third-party help that typically fall under getting help on projects themselves is kind of picking between staffing agencies, staffing partners, sometimes even subcontractors that have extra labor available. Those are the kind of scenarios that will help in making sure that you're vetting them the right way. You know what to expect. They create the relationship with you. They understand what some of the requirements are that you look for, and helping create that longer term fit versus sending you someone random, every single time, right? And those are the two main ways that we're seeing in terms of the alignment in creating that workforce, kind of bridging that gap. And not that you have to pick one way or the other. A lot of situations that people are coming across, they're finding that it isn't a one size fits all approach, right? It's an approach where they have a short term plan for their immediate needs, and simultaneously they're kind of building almost like building the boat as you're rowing, if you will. So, um, and that ends up being kind of the vendors. So let me turn on the question feature. Give me 1 second here. Yeah, great question, Rachel. So one of the question here is we have a recruiting team, but they consistently say there's no candidates in the foreman, superintendent, project management arenas. What are you doing differently that typical recruiters aren't doing that is equating to your vast success as a staffing partner? So one of the fundamental things that we're doing is we are spending a lot of time in actually going out there and finding and playing offense, right? So some of the tools that we use are obviously LinkedIn. LinkedIn is more, we have more hits with LinkedIn and using the LinkedIn recruiter function with positions such as project manager and positions like that. We don't get as great of a hit with superintendent level positions, although we have seen some success in that, but it's not consistent. But the other thing that we always do is we always look at Indeed and Indeed's resume platform. And I'm not sure if you used that in the past, but the Indeed resume platform has been very useful because what it does, it allows you to search for very specific keywords. And as a result, you can look for, and what we generally do is, let's say we have a project need that is for an assistant superintendent or superintendent to start with, right? And so one of the things that we'll do is we will go out there and set up and look for resumes that have certain keywords where we kind of get into the Boolean searches and whatnot. But basically, we look for someone with superintendent in their resume. We look for assistant superintendent in their resume. We look for foreman in their resume. So that active searching and bringing them back to being able to apply to the open job position is something that isn't going to be a direct hit day one, but generally it costs on average $2 to $3 per resume that's to be sent out. But there's certain key terms that you can utilize within Indeed that always helps, and that is looking at Indeed personnel that have updated their Indeed resume in the last 30 days, last 2 weeks, last 3 months. And every day, what we're looking to do is we have someone dedicated to doing that daily, right? So, for example, they are going through and they're looking at certain resumes and they're looking for those keywords. Now, you might only have 20 to 30 that you send out the first day. That's perfectly fine. The second day, what we look for is people that have maybe have that title as well as another company name, right? So if there's a competitor, if there's bigger companies that you know that are hired that are much bigger than yours, different key phrases end up creating a different profile. Because as you can imagine, depending on the needs that you have in terms of your positions and things like that, you might find that you'll need to make these hires in the next 2 to 4 weeks. So being able to kind of do that offensive search on a regular basis brings people back to your job page, right? Then we always, whenever clients have this question as well, we always take a look at, is there the candidates that you're looking for? Is there something about your position or your job announcement that perhaps is, turning away candidates, right? So the lack of mentioning your pay rates, your position titles, your descriptions, if you will. A lot of times we'll see that, if you copy and paste your company's mission and kind of really make it verbose, that unfortunately is a driver that turns people away. They just don't read a whole lot, unfortunately, right? So things like that. The goal really is to be able to create the number of candidates in the funnel. And so I would say that would be a number 2 thing. And the third thing that we've started seeing that works really well or has started to bring in those types of increase in number of applicants is being more present on social media, but specifically, let's say on a platform like Facebook, and doing like a awareness type of campaign that's a paid ad on Facebook, and them clicking on an ad and then being brought back to your careers page, depending on how you're advertising your positions, right? So in this case, being able to be in a situation where a foreman, superintendent, project manager, you have different capabilities in Facebook to be able to target different personnel, different industries. There's some debate about how realistic or how accurate those are, but they have worked for us. Now, it's not 100%, in terms of increasing number of candidates, but that has worked for us in the past, and something that we consistently do. But I would say Indeed is definitely one that has worked well for us. The other things that our team members have tried is kind of based on the existing personnel that you already have on your team, really setting up what we call 15-minute coffee chats with existing personnel and saying, who do you know that's working for another company that does the same thing you do, right? And they're not going to be able to give you 10, 15 people across the board, but generally they'll have at least 1 to 3 names, or so-and-so, so-and-so mentioned that, they've been commuting hour and a half each way, right? So things like that also create a actionable strategy to be able to do that. The high level thing, Rachel, is also that the recruiters have to be, the recruiting team have to understand and be systematic in doing these things on a consistent basis. Because what most common misnomer or misconception is that by doing this one thing for a day or two, that they should be seeing a 50% increase in applicants, right? 50% increase in candidates. That's not always the case, right? So these things kind of take time to build. So over the course of week to 2 weeks, you'll find, for example, in the foreman side, different types of getting a wider reach out there to be able to make that happen. So hope that was helpful. And like I said, if you have any other specific questions on tactics and things like that, definitely let us know and send us an email, or send us your email, and we'll happily get in touch and make that happen. So, and then Douglas, I saw your messages here. I'll definitely get you that information related to the wages and the wage reports. You're totally right. I mean, so one of the things that we do in terms of the reports that we pull, it has been sort of just kind of going back to that statistic that we were talking about earlier. Let's see where it is. So something like this, where we're talking about different carpenter jobs and things like that. Now, this statistic, or this data, is from Fixer that did this survey around middle of 2022. And what you'll see, obviously, is that these wages are probably more in line just because they're federal wages, right? But for example, we always say, 25 to 50% higher in the Bay Area. So in this case, when we're looking at the carpenter jobs within Oakland, California, this is more focused around a specific location in the Bay Area. So these are not meant to be sort of national, across the board type of wage scales. But this data will be available on Indeed under their hiring insights, and I'm happy to post a link to that. And what they'll normally do is they'll ask you for the city that you're interested in, and they'll give you a list of, let's say, a radius 20, 50 miles from a certain place, and they'll give you the data from there. Now, what's obviously unique is that Indeed, they have they'll be able to put that out there. But yeah, check that out. It's the hiring insights, and that'll give you that insight based on the areas that you're looking at, and it'll be more specific to where you're searching for. Let's see. Yep, I think there was one other question on the finished carpenter positions and what that really entails. So this one actually has been finished carpentry for our organization, and working with different teams has been the most active management or active areas of opportunity, as well as kind of the biggest need for clients. And generally for us, what we realize is that the punch list areas of a typical project has been one of the biggest needs of what happens is the general contractor that maybe self-performs a small percentage of the work is then, subs come in, they do their work, and then from there they move on, right? But then they leave a lot of little things that are still remains to be finished, and because of the subcontractors also having a pretty significant hiring challenge, what we're seeing is the fact that the subcontractors can't come back and finish the job because the subcontractors are basically letting the GCs know, look, you have to pick. You want me to come back and finish these little things, or do you want me to come back, or do you want me to continue finishing on the project? You can't really have both, right? And that puts the general contractor in a place where they don't want to obviously create a adverse relationship with the sub, but at the end of the day, this puts the pressure on them to now figure out how are they supposed to get these things done in addition to everything else that's kind of happening on the job site. So finished carpentry and punch list positions has been a very unique need in the industry because normally finished carpentry, they'll come in, there's different levels of finish or punch list items that need to be done, and that's been a big area of opportunity in terms of being able to help construction companies. But then what we generally find is, in addition to the punch list person, the finished carpenter, you need to have a cleaner with them, and they work as a team, and that's kind of where the production aspect comes in. So it's very interesting on that specific niche because it's created by obviously the labor challenges, because subcontractors don't want their subs to stop working on the rest of the site, so they're not being as holding their feet to the fire, if you will, as normally would have, and as a result, they're kind of creating and being able to push that forward. But what they're realizing is even the general contractors themselves are no longer, they don't have the in-house teams to continue doing this. So now they're really searching for a solution, and it's a very skilled position in the sense we've been in scenarios where a lot of things and kudos to our team, led by Julie, that really go through this. But whenever we get put together these punch list teams, there's a lot of questions we ask up front, and mainly because we have to understand the appetite of the client. And most commonly, a luxury apartment building will have a different level or expectation of a punch list program than a traditional, let's say, market rate or affordable housing property, right? A luxury condominium or a luxury apartment building will have skill sets that are, bringing in these types of finishes, that are used to working in these types of finishes, where everything has to be just perfect, right? Those are the kind of things that are great. So that brings a very specific skill set. So we would never send someone, and really understanding the skill sets is a big deal. The second question is, what condition are the units being left in? Because what someone considers to be 90% finished is different than someone considers to be 80% finished. So when we ask these questions to the client, we always like to find out, what do you consider to be a punch ready unit? We have some companies that are just like, well, punch ready means that the flooring contractor's gone through, the trims are in, and all they have to do is they're looking for the very detailed items that make a difference, right? Whereas other clients will say, the flooring's in, the trim's not, the cabinets are in, haven't verified. We had the painting contractor come through, they retextured some walls. We haven't seen any of that stuff. We don't have the time. We need someone that can go through and make a list and punch these things out, and then they can come in and get the work done, right? And the other level of complexity that makes it real fun is also the software, right? Because one of the things that we do as a staffing partner is make sure that we know that whether you're using Procore, PlanGrid, whatever it might be for your solution, and making sure that our teams are aligned with that. And so, because at the end of the day, if the expectation is for someone to come in and be the best finished carpenter in the world, but they also have to be Procore certified so they can use the punch list program on that, we need to, obviously we want to make sure we know that in advance, right? So those are the kind of things that really goes in. And that's why this is one of the most competitive areas right now, because trying to bring in and train people in this type of scenario is a big need. And just because it's an example of how the labor shortage and then the workforce gap has created the dynamic on a job site where typically subcontractors would be told to come back and finish things, otherwise they're not going to be paid. Now at the at the risk of upsetting the subcontractors. We have a lot of superintendents, a lot of PMs that are just like, you know what, we'll deal with it. Just keep moving along, keep producing on the other sides of the site. We'll figure this out. And it ends up being a great conversation. Another question is, how can estimating and project managers benefit from, having a staffing solution or staffing partner early in the process? That's one of the areas that we're really focusing on a lot. And one of the conversations we had recently with the project manager is really boiling down to, on a typical project budget, what we've found out or what we've seen is that there is a separate line item for, let's say, cleaning, a separate line item for labor, and perhaps a separate line item for punch list. And punch list is typically a kind of like if there's 200 units, they might allocate a certain dollar amount per unit. Now, how that translates into billable hours, I don't think the estimating team necessarily has seen that aspect of it. But what we find is that for any of those projects where we can have some of those conversations with estimating teams, project management teams up front to really understand what it would take to get it done, at least helps create the expectation and the communication between, for example, estimating to the PMs, to the project team, like the superintendents, to let them know that, hey, if we can find someone that instead of having someone deal with the labor budget or labor line item as one cost expenditure or cost item, and then have the cleaning line item as a separate one, if we can find ways to combine those skill sets. So, for example, a company that can provide a labor and someone that can do labor work, keep the site clean as well, so that you're not pulling from two separate line items, but you're almost blending them together, helps create that situation of being able to kind of get a better bang for your buck, if you will, right? So having those conversations early on where you might need the help and how many, and what those rates will look like, and kind of becoming more familiar with the project, that helps make sure that anybody that is going to be coming on your job site that is, requested by the superintendent and things like that, help create a much better opportunity or outcome, because we can work with the PM teams and the estimating teams to really figure out how we can alleviate or how we can get you more bang for your buck per line item, right? We've seen things like safety as a separate line item, which obviously makes sense. Then, punch list, cleaning, and labor, 3 separate line items. And sometimes a project might have 3 separate companies that are taking care of each line item. Now, what we'll generally find is, for example, cleaning, especially on like a punch list team, if the punch list team is doing 3 to 4 units a day, but the cleaning, they're also just aligned with them and cleaning 3 to 4 units a day, what we generally will find is that the utilization, or meaning like the amount of time, the percentage of their 8-hour day that they're spending cleaning, is probably only 60 to 70%, right? And as a result, if there's a way to rearrange that workflow a little bit to where they can assist with some labor-related work accordingly, is something that's very useful, right? Or if it's a labor-related cleaner that's cleaning the outside of the site, but there's certain menial tasks that they can take on a punch list item that can at least move the units forward before they do the final clean. Those are the kind of situations where we can really kind of put our heads together and help you figure out how we can help you get the most bang for your buck on those line items. So having those conversations and how the workforce program can really be implemented on a construction project is also a very useful thing, and creates less stress on estimating and PMs, because at the end of the day, obviously they're left with figuring out what to do, and at the end of the day makes the superintendent's lives easier, which is something that we all want. So hope that was useful. I know we're coming up on time almost here. Like I mentioned, let me make sure that the slide with my email is on here. And for those of you, and a lot of you obviously know Julie as well. She's also, you can send her any of your questions, and we're happy to answer them. And we're hoping to do more of these on a more consistent basis to make sure that what we're seeing on the market is what you're hearing. and also getting some feedback from each of you on some of the challenges you're facing. So hopefully you'll join us for the next one and keep it going. So thank you again, everyone, for joining, and looking forward to staying in touch. All right, have a good one.